still got to jump into the actual intro. Welcome back, Mighty Vandals, the Tubs at the Club, the Vandals affiliate on the Big Sky Podcast Network. I am your host, Dallas Hammer, joined today by brave, bold Brian Marceau. But before we get into our introductions, Brian, let's just rip the Band-Aid off. Some shows are a lot of fun. Some shows have so many fun topics to talk about that we're thrilled and energized. And then there are shows where the topic of conversation is just, it's going to start getting negative. And this is one of those shows. So if you don't like it when we talk about the bad, negative things going on in Vandal Athletics, I'd get the fuck out of here now, because this is going to be a hell of a ride. Brian, you're back from your recorded hiatus last week. How's it going, man?
Yeah, it's going well. I do have to issue one correction. I don't view it as bad news. I view it as, this is like, we talk about things that actually happen, guys. And we have something to talk about, which we'll get to in a second. But like, hey, glad to be back. Basketball season is always, it's just the flow is a little bit different. But hey, had a good time watching the men's game. You guys obviously held down the fort without me. It's always fun to record by myself because there's always at least like one Grandpa Brian moment going on. So anyway, good to be back. And like, it's weird, like not excited to talk about this. However, like no one else with a microphone is willing to acknowledge the volleyball catastrophe. So we're here, we're ready for it, and might as well start now.
So Brian, I'll set the stage. Romana Krišková has been named the new head coach of Vandal Volleyball. If that name sounds familiar, that's because she was the interim coach last year on the team that set the world ablaze with 6 sets won across the season, and was previously an assistant to he who must not be named / Chris Gonzalez. So distancing ourselves from the abuses of a former coach, we have piloted ourselves right into one of his assistants being given what I assume is a multi-year contract to lead the volleyball program after a Clausian first year at the helm, Brian?
She didn't have a Clausian first year. She would kill for a Clausian first year. So, okay, look, hey, we're going to go through, we did outside research for this, guys. This isn't just us reacting to a shitty press release. So, but just because we are the fairest show in the world, do want to lead off before we go through, because we can talk about the year Krišková had. And hey, full disclosure, we don't have a lot of great things to talk about with Krišková's last year. But just to lead off, like, hey, so from the research we did, the basic positives people had about Krišková was like, hey, she does care about the program. She clearly does want to find success. This is like funny, I guess. Like, she was serious about the athletes being fed, which is to say, hey, she wasn't involved in abusing the athletes this year. I don't accept that as a benchmark of any sort of reasonable success, because it absolutely is not. That's more about Terry's failure in hiring and failing to supervise Chris Gonzalez. But hey, after the huge, OCR article on the Office of Civil Rights investigation, Krišková figured out how to get women some food. So I guess that's cool.
Hey, progress to the bare minimum is progress.
Yeah. The team did scrimmage more. And at least at the start, Krišková tried to do more team building kind of stuff. We're going to break through, because full disclosure, like you guys can hear that tone. Even some of the positives weren't actual positives, but because it was the fairest show in the world, those were some of the basic positive things. Like, hey, her experience as a player led Krišková to have more productive practices than Chris Gonzalez. Again, not a worthy benchmark of any sort of reasonable success. We've like exhaustively talked about let's call it the ethical part of the failure of Chris Gonzalez that has overshadowed the just transcendently bad tactical failure that Chris Gonzalez was as a head coach. So Krišková being better than that isn't a reasonable baseline for anyone on the planet, but that's where we can start. Those were like the kind of tepid positive takeaways that our research indicated about Krišková.
Yeah. And Brian, I mean, that's about where the positives end for me is, okay, yeah, the girls are getting the right amount of food, and they're not getting verbally harassed. And honestly, some of the things that were said in that OCR report, more than just verbal abuse being handed down to the players. And that, Brian, I mean, that's it. When you start going into the actual like on court characteristics of the team, they won 6 sets. They lost a set to Eastern, 25-4, 25-5, like completely outclassed and blown apart in really every possible athletic category you can get to. So I don't see anything on this resume that you can say, hey, she earned this job by doing a phenomenal job on the court. It is as simple as she's an upgrade over Gonzalez. And that, to me, Brian, that's as far as I can speak positively about this. Is, yeah, the girls are in a better space than they were. They're going from a 1 out of 10 to a 2 out of 10 is still progress. And that's what I've got, Brian. If you've got other positives, I'd love to hear them.
I don't. So like, I want to like, hey, so full disclosure, like you guys can tell, we think this is the safest gamble in the world you can make, is that Krišková is a bad hire and will be a bad hire into the future. So the basic place to start with is, hey, everything we've heard about Krišková, she's a well-meaning, like hardworking, generally speaking, good person who has nowhere near enough experience to be anywhere near a D1 head coaching position, which is where she is. And see, that's what it really boils down to right away, is like, hey, Jason Eck, to talk football, he was an assistant for a very long time before he got his first head coaching job. He got to see a lot of what worked and some stuff that didn't, to decide what would make sense for his programming. Hey, like Thomas Ford, same thing. He's had some experience in a lot of different rooms, so that there's a reason why lots of places don't hire head coaches with no experience. It's a hard job. It takes time to learn how to make things work. Krišková does not have that. And her most recent experience, or her most meaningful experience at the collegiate level, of course, is with like the worst head coach in the world. So I say that because, let's talk first. I said team building at the start was a positive thing that Krišková tried to do. Emphasis on tried, because I mean, like she, from what we were told from sources we'll call very close to the situation, essentially the team building she didn't come across as like this attempt to build like authentic, strong relationships with the team. A lot of it landed as essentially like HR type of stuff to check a box and tell your boss that you had done some of the team building. Like, here's an example. I was told like some of the team building was really coach centric, which is say like, hey, every coach, every sport, there's different levels of, let's say, supervision and team building stuff, but there at least needs to be some time where the athletes are not with coaches. So they're not performing for the people evaluating them. This is part of why we have coaches have things like captains to help organize these things. And again, like it varies across sports, but like volleyball is not that big a team. It's not logistically speaking, it's not that big a deal to say like, hey, captains need to take care of. We need to do these team building things. Here's what I'd like to do. Please take care of it. Some version of that. Krišková and like the trainer were at pretty much every single team building thing. So they didn't land as team building. And also like an example I gave of some of the team building stuff was Krišková, like essentially doing like corporate type icebreakers where people had to memorize like 4 facts about whoever they were sitting next to. So that's what's like, hey, phase 1, like because she's inexperienced, she has a broken compass, which experience might be able to fix. But she's not getting experience under really good head coaches to see what other people do. She's now running the show. So like, that gave that example as something at the team building level. She had the right idea, but like she doesn't have enough background to execute it well. There's more areas. And hey, Dallas, not trying to put you on the shelf, but like here's an example of something that I was told. Hey, early on, like it felt like it worked pretty well, but then later on it changed. So Krišková, according to reports we have, became pretty desperate by the end of the year to pick up wins. And no one had expectations that Idaho was going to pick up a ton of wins. But if you thought Idaho would default be better by Chris Gonzalez leaving, turns out you were wrong. Even getting rid of the abuse, Idaho they picked up 1 win with Krišková. Now, hey, there's a lot of blame to go around in a season where a team picks up 1 win. But that blame is going to be mutual. Well, hey, players might blow assignments and hey, like that's on them. They need to get better. But coaches also, it's their job to put people in position to succeed. Again, talk about Jason Eck. We saw him do this 1,000 times in his press conferences. He would own in public when he felt he made judgment calls that were wrong. Mm-hmm. Everything we were told, especially by the end of the year, Krišková was essentially putting all responsibility for failures and losses, whether it's strategic failures in game or like the ultimate result of a loss, completely putting it all on the captains, putting responsibility on the captains that one had not been articulated to the captains as their responsibility in the first place, or was things that like the responsibility would have been shared anyway amongst the team. But like part of the Chris Gonzalez DNA did not leave the team when Krišková took over. And that's a great example of it, of like, hey, whose fault is it? It's always someone who's not the head coach is their fault. One of the things that Krišková did I described her as being desperate for wins based off our sources that were very close to the situation. There were times at the end of the year where Krišková was putting players in matches at positions they had not practiced, or using rotations in the game at positions they had not practiced. So like, hey, they're out there ready to, during matches, they're supposed to perform. The players are having to do stuff they're not used to. And of course, she would always put when things didn't go well, as they didn't most of the time, she would put that completely on the players. And if you think players don't pick up on that, obviously they do instantly. So I guess like I'll let you jump in here because I got more I can talk about, but like might as well like give a pause. But like, hey, phase 1, when I'm saying she's not experienced, like the interpersonal part, by the way, strategic too, but the interpersonal part of coaching, there's a lot she just, according to sources talk to us, she just doesn't get, and she's not about to get it being a head coach now without spending, she's not doing the Court Dennison thing. When Dennison got in trouble, he went and worked his way up, worked at other places, showed maturity, stuff like that. Kriškova's not leaving to go have her, journey through the woods, metaphorically speaking, to pick up new things and become better. She's just the head coach. Mm-hmm. So it's going to be hard to expect much really to change. But again, hey, you jump in, Dallas. I've been going for a while. I've got a lot more, but take it away.
Yeah. I mean, Brian, we'll get back to the actual reasons Kriškova may have gotten hired. As far as actual volleyball, yes, she played at Wisconsin, and I know that Terry very much values Wisconsin. She brings it up frequently. Once she finishes at, I think she was at VCU first in Wisconsin, goes off and plays professional volleyball overseas for 5-6 years, comes back to Moscow. Her first season is as an assistant with Chris Gonzalez. Second season is the interim head coach, and third season she's now fully in charge, interim tag removed. So this is not someone who has a bunch of experience coaching that is looking for their first breakthrough into the head coaching realms. This is legitimately someone who had a volunteer year in France in 2022-23, then 23-24 was on Chris Gonzalez's staff that won under 5 games. Then the interim head coach, and now the full head coach. As Andrew Whipple says in the comment section, bad hire, could pick a dozen 6A coaches in the state who could jumpstart the program better. Then a follow-up comment from Andrew. So no Big West, Big Sky, or Mountain West assistant coaches out there interested in the job. I think there'd be a couple dozen candidates. Ted Lasso would coach them to at least 2 wins. And I think Ted Lasso would probably win a lot more than 2, just based on fixing the interpersonal stuff. Because, Brian, you get to the coach-based, the team building, and I'm going to always be there. It's the number one rule of team building. That's not going to do anything. I am in management in my company, and yes, there is certainly mandatory fun where I'm there and I'm seeing all of the employees that are underneath me, and while they're not kissing my ass, it's definitely a different vibe when the boss is there and you're all expected to be on your best behavior for your boss. You can't truly bond as a team with your boss around you all the time. So in my work, we try to do a very good job of, hey, every few months we're going to schedule something. We're going to pay for the whole thing and just say, hey, you guys go have fun, go nuts. Whichever person is designated as hey, well, you're responsible for paying the bill at the end of the night with the company card. That's as far as we go. And we let the rest of the team figure it out themselves, because it's ultimately the team. It is abhorrent to me, Brian, that this is the hire that we have landed on. I'm sure Romana is a nice person. We have heard nothing but fairly good things about the way that she has interacted in comparison to how Chris Gonzalez treated everyone.
Which is not a reasonable baseline.
Again, like you said, not reasonable there at all. But if she can't do the interpersonal stuff very well, she doesn't have much of a background as a coach. So what are we doing here other than hiring someone that was the easiest choice and had the big Wisconsin Badger W next to her name for a couple of years?
No, there's some other kind of weird interpersonal stuff. Hey, you talked about the Eastern match. That's in November, where in the first set, Idaho loses 25-4.
And let me stop you right before you get into the story, Brian. There were 615 people listed in attendance there as per the official count at Reese Court. If you are one of the 615, or someone that was there, please get in touch with us, because I would love to hear more about this story from other people that witnessed it. But Brian,
well,
go ahead.
Again, source very close situation. So hey, that Eastern game, they lose first set 25-4. Kriškova has the athletes do burpees as a punitive response in front of the entire, hey, the audience. And a minor thing too, tactically, doing conditioning mid-match throws away some of your energy, guys. It's a very dumb strategy from the very baseline of, hey, we're trying to perform. We need to be at our best. Let's throw away a bunch of energy on doing burpees. But the other thing, like, it was done punitively in front of parents, fans, the other team. And the rationale Krišková gave the team was, essentially, paraphrasing, she didn't know how to motivate them. They appear to not like doing burpees. Maybe that'll make them work harder. Like, that's what I mean when I talk about, like, no, like, the compass is broken right now. Like, that's just not, that level is not good enough. And here's another weird interpersonal thing. So at this point, the roster, which has 8 players, counting people who've transferred in, the players who are not returning from 2024, which we can't look up because UI's website on volleyball is completely jacked up.
Like, most of the 24 roster is just completely gone.
Yeah, if you left from 2024 right now, according to our sources, you left because you graduated, or you left because Krišková told you don't have a spot on the team and you transferred out. Now, hey, lots of coaches do that to clear out roster space. That part itself isn't, shocking news or something like that. The team won one match. You'd expect there's going to be some turnover in that way.
Absolutely.
But hey, just as your reference point, like, the people who are there, it's not like these are like Krišková's people. Krišková, the people who left, graduated, or were kicked off the team by Krišková. But recently at practice, because the team is doing their spring training, Krišková told the remaining players on the roster, especially ones from 2024, to, according to our sources, to, quote, let go of their exes. And you might think, hey, what she's talking about, boyfriends? What, this is kind of weird. No, like, Krišková's definition of exes are people who graduated or transferred away from the team. So alums who stuck it out for the entirety of Chris Gonzalez and Romana Krišková are now being branded as others/exes. That Krišková, the clear implication of let go of your exes, was, hey, like, don't interact with them about volleyball stuff. Like, hey, like, they're not part of the team anymore. The alums who graduated and lived through all of this are no longer, like, hey, part of your team, which, hey, of course, at the literal level, they're not on the team practicing. But, like, that whole Vandal family thing that on Vandal Insider, Terry just completely put a bunch of bullshit on, which, hey, you guys should listen to the Vandal Insider episode where Terry talks about hiring Krišková. It's a joke, but you should. It's at least her saying something. This is why she never talks in public, because she sounds like an idiot every time she does.
She's a fucking idiot.
That idea of, hey, everyone who's not us are exes, yeah, that sounds healthy. That sounds like a Vandal family building kind of situation, And why she's doing this, in part because no one in the world thinks this is a good hire, except Terry, and I'm assuming Krišková thinks it's a good hire because she signed the contract. But there's absolutely no one who thinks that this is possibly a good hire. But before we get to that part, look at the boxes available. By the end of the year, like I said, like, hey, she devolved as a coach in the eyes of the players. Early on, when she started the year out, there was, like, we talked about it on the show, there was a little bit of a rift in the team because a good amount of players did not want Krišková back because she was connected to Gonzalez. They felt like she enabled Gonzalez because, hey, she's a coach, she's a mandatory reporter, and did she report? No. Now there were some players too who felt like, hey, they thought they'd read in the report she did some stuff that was okay, like she is not a U.S. citizen, she lose her job, she's at risk of being deported. Chris Gonzalez is the worst boss in the world, so, like, whatever, we'll suspend disbelief. She tried a little bit. That rift existed. By the end of the year, there was not a rift in the team about how the team felt about Krišková. Universally, the team was, they wanted her gone from Vandal Volleyball. And when the announcement was made that the position was open for applications, this was thing that's posted to Instagram, that's how we found out about it. The team in general was excited about a new direction, which is, say, they had a year working with Krišková, and the general idea of excitement was completely gone from the majority of the team by the time that, we get to this point. So, if you look, what box you want to look at, Dallas? Did she do something with the players that inspired a bunch of confidence? Not according to the sources we have. Absolutely not. Did she pick up more wins to show you that, hey, even though this was, to be fair, a very tough situation to take over, she took over as interim officially in August. Now, part of that is Idaho's fault for not firing Gonzalez for cause, which they could have done, but that was their call. So, but anyway, like, hey, did we see any growth on court? No. Not really, even though the players said like, hey, practices were a little bit better, but no, there was no growth there. Was there a lot of great team building? Well, yes, if your team building is wanting a new coach as a cohesive unit, sure. I don't think I'd call that team building. What based off what we were told, the team building efforts that took place that weren't that fruitful. So, what box is supposed to show growth that Krišková checked? None. But we have a hire. I was told, hey, Tom Kendall comment section, didn't they interview 2 others? I feeling those folks had zero chance, just going through the motions of interviewing 3 people. Yeah, we were told there were 3 finalists. Now, how any search, and hey, Golick said this on Vandal Insider, the Idaho did not use a search firm for this hire. And now on one end, like, well, a search firm might give you a list of names like that, and then you hire people on your own. But with how Golick completely failed on her own with running the last volleyball coach search, it's astonishing that the mindset wasn't, okay, we need brains other than ours in here because we obviously don't know what we're doing. No, that wasn't the call. But yeah, Tom, we were told there were 3 people who were finalists that interviewed, and the coach Idaho lands on to hit on Andrew Whipple's comment earlier, referencing conferences, is Idaho chooses to hire a coach who would not even receive an interview at a single other Big Sky school after having her for a year to witness no growth. On the Vandal Insider podcast, Terry sounded exactly like she sounded on our show when she was back on our show back in the day talking about Zach Claus, where the best thing she could say was he was a rule follower. Pretty much all she could say about Krišková is like, yeah, she's trying hard. Terry, weirdly, in her talking about recruits, both praised Krišková for her recruiting efforts while 10 seconds later backtracking and saying the recruits Idaho has aren't good enough yet. So like, make up your mind.
Correction, Brian. It was the other way around. She said that we're not there yet because we don't have the kind of recruits that we want. And then it was 10 seconds after that she said we're doing great with our recruiting. We got really good kids to come here.
Yeah. And I didn't even bring up that, like, hey, Krišková also, this is the inexperience. She just had some like rookie mistakes with logistics that a seasoned head coach isn't going to have. Hey, they had a camping trip early on in the summer where a lot of us are from the Pacific Northwest. Y'all know what camping is. It's a tent. It's sleeping bags. It's fires, stuff like that. Yeah, Krišková, they didn't have sleeping bags. Like, Idaho's outdoor department was supposed to supply them with that stuff. They didn't. I don't know why. But Krišková, the camping was 2 hours outside of town. Krišková didn't send someone in to go get sleeping bags. Just had the team like either sleep without anything or like bundle up with like 3 or 4 girls in a tent with one blanket. Like, didn't even go back to get like blankets. And according to what we were told, hey, like a handful of people got sick afterward. You might say, well, hey, it's the summer. And like, why was it? How that matter? Well, depending on where you are, it can get cold in the summer, guys. So, but like, hey, that's a like dumb logistical thing, right? Dallas, you can send a person in to get blankets. No, the team was late to the flight for their last match, or their last travel match with Northern Colorado and Northern Arizona. They were late to their flight because of just poor itinerary. Like, Krišková essentially did all the itineraries, and she just didn't do a very good job with that itinerary. That wasn't the first time she struggled with that. There's a trip to Eastern Washington, the one, the burpee trip, I call it, where the team arrived super late and almost missed like their pregame meal. Like, did they get it? Yes. But like, it's an example of, there's also logistical things that as a rookie, like, she just doesn't have down, that if you give her experience, hey, maybe she could become an okay coach in the future, but that means working under someone who knows what they're doing. And that's, so again, like, what box did we check here in the last year other than
Terry's favorite box of, I didn't have to do a fucking thing other than take the candidate that was the easiest one to give the job to. Like, we have talked very extensively, heavily about how thrilled we are about Thomas Ford, Brian, but it would also be remiss to not point out the fact that Thomas Ford was the second easiest hire you could have made beyond Dan Jackson, and Dan Jackson was initially offered the job first. Again, I don't have an issue with that. Like, Thomas Ford, smart hire. Like, yeah, that lines
I
up.
wanted Ford over Jackson.
Yeah, same, honestly. And like, that makes sense. Bring back the guy from a previous staff that is has succeeded everywhere. The players love him. He was great here. He coordinated the special teams. They were great. Like everything made sense. There were a lot of boxes that were checked.
Yeah.
And we don't have the interpersonal hero. We don't have stories of, oh man, all the players love her to death. We don't have that. We definitely don't have any success to speak about. They won 2 sets in conference play, Brian. Like, do you know how fucking hard that is to just September 26th, they get a set against Portland State. They don't get another set until November 7th. And that is the final one of the season. Legitimately 2 sets won between the middle of September to the end of the season. So certainly not checking any boxes for massive improvement on the court. So what are we doing here? Unless it comes down to Idaho couldn't afford anybody else, or nobody else wanted to take this job because it's so bad. Those are your other options here, other than the one that's, Occam's razor. It's the easiest solution is typically the right one. It was the easiest thing to do, to just promote Krišková up and say, hey, you know what? I didn't fuck up hiring Chris Gonzalez. I meant to hire his assistant the whole time. It worked really well for women's basketball, which, I mean, to be fair, she fell ass backwards into that one. Art Moreira has been doing a great job. That program, they got crushed by NAU, and we'll have Martin on in a little while to talk about that. But this is unacceptable, Brian. If this was with the football team, Paul Petrino gets canned, and somebody decides, you know what? I think one of these GAs could be our head coach, and pumps Lloyd Hightower up to head coach. It would have been like, what? But because it's volleyball, it's a little easier to sweep under the rug,
I guess. I mean, so we've hit on the part that now it's obvious Krišková's a bad hire, guys. Like, hey, when the season starts, we'll obviously wish her the best and wish the Vandals to show up the best.
I hope I'm wrong about everything we've said tonight.
We're not going to be. But like, we don't need. It's important to acknowledge the failures as they're taking place. This was a dumb hire. Krišková would not have gotten an interview at a single other Big Sky school. That's unilateral surrender. And look, Dallas, you will never convince me that Idaho couldn't get someone better than Krišková, because coaches always believe you don't become a coach because you don't believe in yourself. A good coach is going to look at Idaho and be like, okay, well, that's a rebuild. Maybe I want a little bit extra for contract security. But good coaches get to where they're at because they have faith in themselves, because they believe they're doing the right thing because they have evidence they've done the right thing elsewhere. You are not going to ever sell me on the fact that Idaho could not get a better candidate. And if that is truly the case, then look at the absolute Terry is an even worse failure with volleyball than we could have possibly imagined. It's so, hey, pick your poison. Which one?
Yeah.
That's
what it comes down to.
The other thing why I believe this absolutely will fail is the volleyball community is pretty tight. And like we found that out researching the Chris Gonzalez stuff, because we had people who'd reach out and they had lots of connections, and that's why when Idaho hired Gonzalez, lots of people immediately contacted Golick saying like, oh, good God, no, do not do this. Do not do this. So if you look at the roster that Idaho has right now, it's all foreign. It's majority foreign players. There's the only returning players from last season are foreign. There's 3 transfers to the roster who are American. I just bring that up. There's nothing wrong with foreign players on the roster. Every team's going to have it. But that's what Idaho's essentially going to have to rely on, because Terry has told essentially the western part of the United States that Idaho is not serious about volleyball. They told the western part of the United States that by hiring Chris Gonzalez, ignoring the allegations for essentially about 2 years, and then not firing him, and then now hiring a Gonzalez assistant. What this needed was a complete clean reset. So I say that because Idaho, I believe, and people we've talked to just believe this, Idaho's going to really struggle to recruit athletes from the Western United States because people who are aware of what happened at Idaho and the volleyball community, there's a good amount of people, especially in the West, who are going to believe, one, that Krišková is just not the right coach, that they're not going to want to commit their future to it. The other is they're going to say, how could Idaho possibly have been okay with keeping any DNA from Chris Gonzalez here voluntarily? Krišková is an interim last season, completely made sense. There wasn't really another choice. This is voluntary. And Idaho is choosing to say, hey, the legacy of Chris Gonzalez gets to live on. That's going to absolutely hurt recruitment. And I just think you're going to have a ton of people who are going to tell athletes, like, hey, locally and in the greater Pacific Northwest and West itself, hey, do not consider Idaho. Absolutely don't consider Idaho. That's not a place that you want to go. Coach, they have the wrong coach there. The admin is not going to support you. By the way, Terry, by what we were told, after Terry made a big deal about talking to the athletes during the OCR when Chris Gonzalez was finally put on leave. She essentially didn't talk to him after that. Again, it was like just a completely HR check the box. Yeah, we covered our due diligence. So if we're in court, we can say we talked to them about support and all the resources, then absolutely nothing else. So, I mean, it's a failure all around. For the athletes who stuck it out, glad you guys did. Glad to call you vandals. You're not exes to us. You're vandals for life, right? And anyway, I don't know what else to say. Right here it's a complete failure on every single count. It's embarrassing that Terry hasn't been fired. It's the message is that women's volleyball does not matter,
and it doesn't. Unfortunately, it doesn't. I hate that I have to say that, but it doesn't. Like, you read the fucking room, it does not matter. If it did,
should finish that sentence. Does not matter to
the people that are like. Brian, you and I have no bearing on anything. We're two random slapdicks that people, for some reason, listen to. There's obviously people that don't listen to us and quite despise us. But for the people that make decisions and determine what matters, Terry Golick has made it very clear she does not give a single fuck about this team. Captain 58 in the comment section: hiring an assistant from a good staff is a solid move. Hiring an assistant from a staff run by an abusive jerk, not solid, not at all. No shade on Krišková, but being associated with the previous head coach is poison. Idaho needed a clean break. And MVP Jason Mayer. Wow, I'm struggling tonight. I worry about the ripple effect for other women's sports. Your AD at Idaho does not support women. Tom Kendall with the cherry on top. It's obvious TG could care less about could not care less about the volleyball program. Brian, I want to point back to the Vandal Insider podcast that was released today because we've mentioned a couple things on it. I was a big fan of Golick going on and getting asked by Patchen about Krišková, and she mentioned the stuff about the recruiting. And then she goes on to say, I challenge everybody to work hard to make our volleyball program better. That's how we did it in football. That's how we did it in basketball. It takes a village. In particular, student athletes need to get on board. And if I was a student athlete in that volleyball program right now, I'd be working my tail off in the weight room, doing whatever it takes and continuing to do it from now until your first match. You can't just sit out in the summer. That's not the way it is anymore. I'm going to go on record and say that Tubbs at the Club is a pro student athlete podcast and Dallas Hammer is a fuck Terry Golick host, because that is fucking bullshit. To go on to state-sponsored media where all they're going to do is fluff each other about how great things are going. You go on there and you act like the student athletes are the problem with this volleyball program?
Yep.
What? Everything Tom and Jason just said in the comment section, that shows everything. Terry Golick does not care about you. If she's willing to go on to the state media podcast and tell everyone and their mother, hey, we did a great job with Krišková. Yeah, our recruits aren't very good, but it's going to get there. We did bring some good kids in, though, but man, they all just got to start working harder. Nailed it, Terry. Nailed it. That was absolutely the problem. Chris Gonzalez couldn't get the girls to work hard enough. Krišková couldn't get the girls to work hard enough.
Yep, they hadn't done enough.
You found it. That was the problem. Fucking moron.
Yeah, co-signed. Hey. Obviously, we'll follow as this goes on. But no, you're right. Like what Terry Golick said is the AD version of get over your exes.
Yeah.
Or let go of your exes. That's the AD version of it. So I'm sure the two put that message together. That's speculation, but they're saying essentially the same thing. The people who don't like what happened with Gonzalez and thought Krišková was terrible because the team won 5 sets the entire year. and start 6. And by the end of the year, she was playing people positions they hadn't practiced, and everything was always the fault of someone other than Krišková. Like, no, those people, they're wrong. They're cancer. We need to get rid of those people. Which again, the people who've transferred out, Krišková told to leave. I don't know. We have to move on, especially as Martin records something.
Yes,
But
we have to move on. But I just want to reiterate it. If you are close to Vandal Volleyball, if you are a former player, a former fan, a supporter in any way, somebody who has been hurt by the fact that Vandal Volleyball is just not cared about anymore by this athletic department, man, my heart goes out to you. There's nothing worse than feeling like there's nowhere to go, and that's what it felt like with Vandal football for 9 years. Petrino had a couple flashes in the pan of bowl season, and a couple times where it was like, if a couple things broke differently, things would get close. But the end of that era just felt like, man, we're sitting here waiting on a miracle. And then football got that miracle in Eck. We're really hoping that Ford continues that. And I don't think that miracle's coming for Vandal Volleyball anytime soon. Tom Kendall in the comment section, 2018, the Vandal Volleyball program is 23-10. That seems so long ago. Yeah.
I guess one thing I want to add, because we tried to do this when we covered volleyball previously, we don't want to come across as like infantilizing the student athletes, because, hey, the people who transcended the struggle of the last few years, hey, look, they're going to be stronger for it. They're going to put together lessons that, they apply their own lives, their own families, their own careers. Mm-hmm. But most people in college athletics, they learn those lessons without having to just go through this horse shit for 3 years. Most people, they get to go through their athletics and talk about, like, hey, all the good times, not like, oh, hey, we had a coach who wasn't abusive. That was awesome.
Yeah. Life's hard enough as it is. You shouldn't have a coach and honestly, a failure from the athletic director all the way down. You shouldn't have to deal with that. And it sucks, Brian. So
if you see Terry, another job well done.
I just, when she moves on, it will be 7 years too late. Brian, any final thoughts on volleyball before we make a nice little transition down the river and out of this steaming, festering pile of shit?
No, we got to run. Martin recorded. We got to get his stuff on.
That is perfect. So, everybody, I know we've been talking about some pretty awful shit here, but you know what's not awful shit? Hughes River Expeditions. If you're looking for a great all-inclusive week-long vacation, do not look past your backyard, because Hughes River Expeditions has been Vandal-owned and operated since 1976, and they are ready to take you on the vacation of a lifetime. Enjoy a multi-day trip down the middle fork of the Salmon, the main Salmon River of no return, the Salmon River Canyons, or even the Selway. You could check out a really special trip like one to see the Perseid meteor shower. You could camp on pristine beaches or bitches. Brian's back, so the bitches are back on the menu. Run amazing whitewater, hike scenic trails, spot wildlife, fish the most remote stretches of river in the country, like I'm always saying. There's even some beautiful natural hot springs. You guys know the hot springs in the Pacific Northwest cannot be beat. Let Hughes River show you some of the best ones out there. Just bring your clothes, and they're going to handle everything else. Grab a paddle, catch dinner, and ride the bull all throughout the Gem State. Call them out 406-540-4450. All right, Brian. A little bit of producing in public here. Pretty busy day for both of us in our work and school lives. So this is not something I have seen yet, and it's not something you have seen yet. So we are going to throw Martin's pre-recorded Martin's Magical Minutes up here, and we're all just going to go along for the ride. So without further ado.
D-A-H-O! I know, go, all right, guys. Thank you, Brian or Dallas. I don't know who's introing this video now. But thank you for that lovely intro. Again, I'm here to talk about the women's basketball game. It kind of a tale of two different games. Well, I'm a silly goose and stuff just happened randomly, and we are producing on the fly. So I don't know what the fuck that just was. There's swear word number one. as it said as I tried to say beforehand, a tale of two different games for Idaho. One game where you'd expect Idaho, the way we've all seen Idaho play this year, was against Northern Colorado. They won 68-57. Kind of just never really let off the gas at all. No real slip ups at all for Northern Colorado. Sorry, words are hard. Yeah, and it was led by the usual, I won't say suspects is the right word to use, but Olivia Nelson led the way again in this game, 27 points. 27 points. Hope Hassman had 12. Rosie Schweitzer had 10 points. Jennifer Adlin only had 2.7 rebounds. Was still another good rebounding game from her. What am I blanking on here? Yeah, this game was a lot, I'd say, what you'd expect from Idaho. And moving to the other game now. This one was and in Northern Arizona was a buzzsaw, and it was not. I wouldn't say not expected is the right word to use, but I would say at the very least it was shocking to see this. I knew NAU was good. I just didn't think they were that good. And man, they showed it. So hats off to, I got nothing but respect for Lori Payne and her team, what she's built down there in Flagstaff. It is amazing to see what they've put together there so far. And it was a good game I would say it was a complete game by Northern Arizona. I know I'm going to do a little stat reading here. I know some people might not like it, but some people that haven't been watching it, Idaho kind of held around for the first quarter in a little bit into the second quarter, but then NAU just put on the gas and went to a whole nother gear. First quarter, 29-25. And then 27-17, 27-17 again, then 23-17 in the fourth quarter, and Idaho lost to Northern Arizona 106-76. And I know Idaho's defense has been playing really well this year, and to me, it was very shocking. It was nobody got over 15 points for Idaho. Hope Hassman, Jennifer Allen both had 14 points, plus Olivia Nelson only having 13. Kind of like some stuff I would point to in this game where things maybe made it feel like were kind of things really pulled away for Idaho, kind of made Northern Arizona pull away. Idaho shot 38% from the field and just 35% from 3-point line compared to Northern Arizona's. They shot 53% from the field and 51% from threes. And there were at some points where it felt like they were just making every shot and Idaho couldn't buy a shot to save their life. I know one of their gal, I think I'm looking at her now, Sophie Glancy, she was blocking shots, and I know sometimes you just keep going to see if you can get past them, but Sophie was the best player on the court that game, and man, I hope Idaho can get players like her to come to Moscow, because man, she was unstoppable in that game. Why is things acting slow? Big Sky Page always loves to act slow during this time period, but hope you're having a good Tuesday. I know I am. I'm enjoying it right now. I'm really dumb. I could have done this. Next two games for Idaho are against Weber State on Thursday night and Idaho State on Saturday. I believe it's blackout the dome blackout the dome. That obviously didn't work, what I was trying to show you. But it's giving them time. Hopefully, I know Idaho should probably be able to start another win streak again. Weber State, I know, is trending in the right direction this week for trending in the right direction. I can't remember. I'm sorry. I don't know anything about Idaho State, but I know they are usually pretty good. Weber State is currently 7-10 on the year, and Idaho State is past. And Idaho State I know Seed and Sobolewski coach teams have been pretty good, so I don't hold it against them. They'll probably give Idaho another tough battle like they have done in years past. And I will now toss it back to Brian and Dallas. As always, go Vandals.
Go Vandals.
I love the drop in of Patty there, Martin, and I'm only disappointed that you didn't make a salad tossing joke as it came back to us, but life goes on. Yeah, Martin, that NAU game was bad. That is a heck of a program down there. They've been conference co-champs a couple of years ago, second in the conference last year, going to be first or second in the conference this year. Like that NAU team is a squad. So it is unfortunate to see the ladies just run into a buzzsaw after that really nice 6-win streak there. But Brian, any thoughts on the women's team and what Martin said before we cap off with the men's team that had one of the most explosive finishes to a game I've seen in a long time? Brian, you're muted.
That's on brand. Women are they're third in conference right now, guys. They're playing great. There's kind of a big divide in the Big Sky after you get past the Idaho number 3 overall records. Like there's 3 teams who are above 500. That's all the top three teams. It's kind of a big jump down from number 3 beyond. So hey, these are winnable games for Idaho. Of course, Idaho needs to pick up these wins. So like, hey, go support the team. But anyway, as Martin talked about, there's a lot of things to like about how this team plays basketball. They play their style is real fun, and their scoring is pretty balanced. So yeah, Martin knows more about than me, but get out there and support the women.
So Brian, transitioning over to basketball, the men's basketball team. What happened last week?
Yeah, so Idaho goes 1-1 against Northern Colorado and NAU. Kind of surprising results. Now, hey, Northern Colorado was without their leading scorer, but Idaho picks up a win at home, 77-76 over Northern Colorado. Pretty big comeback in that second half. Honestly, Idaho got virtually no wing production at all in the first half. They were kept afloat by Tyler Linhart, Julius Mims, and Kyson Rose. That's how Idaho got 18 to their 26. If not for that game's over by halftime. Then Colton Mitchell, man, he just kicked it into a different gear in the second half. Yeah, he had a pretty dramatic game winner, but I think he had 1 point in the first half, so he scores 24 in the second, 24 in the second half for 25 on the game. Goes 6-12 from the field, 5-9 for 3. Really carried Idaho offensively in the second half, though. Hey, Tyler Linhart scored 17 off the bench too. So without Linhart and Colton Mitchell having the games they did, that's a loss. Which, hey, it's a big deal that Idaho picked up that win because, look, Idaho men are a solid basketball team. Solid basketball teams sometimes pick up wins they shouldn't and then drop games they shouldn't. That's exactly what happened on this trip. Idaho stole a game against Northern Colorado, and then absolutely gave a game away against Northern Arizona. I mean, Idaho led at the half 41-37, really looked just like the better team overall against NAU, but ends up losing 80-72. And it was not because NAU played so well. NAU really tried to give that game away, but Idaho could not make them do it. I mean, the Vandals were led against NAU by, hey, Mims, another big game. He had 16 points on 8 of 8 shooting. Colton Mitchell, another solid night, 15 points, 4-7. Jack Payne added 20, going 7-14. Takeaways from those two games real quick are, now, because Idaho doesn't have like a star or a player who's great at creating offense on his own consistently. Colton Mitchell has done it a couple games, but he certainly hasn't done that consistently across the season. Idaho needs to get kind of scattershot production of people stepping up and having, solid games, or, essentially like a game, what you might call like an average plus a half game for them as far as their offensive production to win games, which, hey, that I just talked about. Idaho had different guys step up different nights, but we really saw this in the NAU game. The lack of shot creators for Idaho sometimes leads Idaho to taking too many threes without putting pressure on the defense. And this Idaho team has to make threes. They're going to put those up. That's part of how this team, they need to make some shots to win games. That's what we're going to see. But really, one of the things that stood out in that second half when Idaho's offense against NAU, when Idaho's offense went stagnant, is Pribble did not play his bench very much in the second half at all. And his bench has some of the guys who are better at putting pressure on the defense off the dribble. Talking about Tyler Lindhart, talking about Isaiah Brickner. Now, Brickner may have an injury. Not 100% sure if that's the case. I don't know why Lindhart didn't play in the second half, because both those guys look solid in the first half against NAU, but they didn't get off the bench. This is a fact for a team like Idaho. The answer of what a team that needs production from a lot of different guys at different levels, the answer for what that team does is not always going to be the same across the entire year, because a bunch of steady guys means some guys are going to have different points of the year where they pick up their play. Like, hey, we just talked about Jack Payne having some good games last week, but he scored 20 against NAU. That was a big deal. He really struggled a bit more against Northern Colorado. Well, not to call him out. That's just an example of solid guys they'll peak at other times and trough at other times, right? So that means your lineup answer is going to vary throughout the year. It's pretty clear right now to me that when Idaho has lineups with Tyler Mruss, Jack Payne, and Christian Gonzalez out at the same time, that lineup has to make threes or the offense gets stagnant, because, hey, Julius Mims doesn't create offense for himself either. And Colton Mitchell has to facilitate offense. That's a lineup that's going to be prone to shooting threes without really doing a ton to get the ball inside the paint, because that lineup doesn't have much shot creators. Well, that happens to be their starters. Now, Idaho doesn't exclusively rely on starters for production, but that was the lineup Pribble went with in the second half for the most part. And I just feel like, I think Pribble's a great coach. I think that was a mistake, though. I think not. I think this team is going to have, they need guys. I said it last week. They have to put more pressure on the defense. They have to score more, moving the ball and with penetration to open up threes, so the team gets better three looks, because the team needs those good three looks. And, hey, teams adjust defensively throughout the season. Happens in football, happens in basketball, happens in every sport, unless you're Idaho volleyball. The other coach that you're going against, they got to their spot because they earned their spot. So that's it. I think that's the issue with Idaho. Teams want Idaho to shoot threes without pressuring the defense. They like when Idaho takes threes that are, the ball has not entered the 3-point line. That happened. There's just not enough movement in the second half against NAU. And I bring that up exhaustively as I did, because as cool as that comeback win against Northern Colorado was, as dramatic that shot that Colton Mitchell hit, and that was a top 5 center moment on SportsCenter. Nothing, not trying to take away from that at all. That was a feel-good moment. That doesn't mean the team took a next step. They are who I've said they were the entire season. They're solid, they're fun, but they're a solid team's going to pick up. They're going to pick up wins they shouldn't once or twice in the season, and they will drop games they should not as well. That's why it's Idaho being around 500, which I think that's what this team's going to be. Big step up, right? But we're all looking for ways. We're all trying to track how Idaho develops through the season. We're all hoping Idaho can beat that 500 mark. I think that'd be a big deal for this program. Had Idaho been able to get to 5-3 in Big Sky play, I feel like that would have been a big deal for this program. They sit at 4-4. That's not a catastrophe, right? It's one game. You pick up some more wins and whatever, it's fine. I mean, Idaho's still at number 247 in Ken Palm rating, which is to say they're holding steady, significantly higher than Idaho's been in the last half decade. So hey, that the analytic data matches what you see in front of you. Mm-hmm. But I think Pribble's going to have to be creative with this team offensively, because Idaho doesn't have, I think, a ton of elite shooters, which is say they have solid shooters, but that means they need good looks. That's, Christian Gonzalez is 5 of his last 22 over the last 3 games. He's taken a developmental step too, but he's shooting 5 of 22 in part because his next developmental step is being able to score a little bit more in the mid range. Because if you're not an elite 3 shooter, if you are an elite 3 shooter, you're going to have some variability with how that goes in. If you're a solid 3 shooter, you're absolutely going to have some variability. And I think this Idaho team, look over for the first, start of Big Sky Conference play, counting OOC play, Idaho was like a top 50, 60 team in the nation shooting threes out of 355. Well, they've dropped to sub 100, which is say they're still holding serve at around 500, but they're not going to be able to rely on shooting threes without other stuff happening offensively. And I say that focusing on offense because Idaho does not have the size yet, or hey, just to be frank, the overall, especially with the lateral movement, this team is not yet athletic enough to be a good defensive team. They play hard. They have a good strategy, but this team isn't about to be a top-notch defensive team. They have to beat teams by putting points on the board, which generally speaking, Idaho's been able to do. But I think the NAU game really was a template that a lot of other teams are going to use defensively. If Russ, Payne, and Gonzalez are all out together, teams aren't really worried about Idaho doing a ton to, create offense, to have individual players create offensive looks for other people. It's just, that's not what that lineup has done. So it'll be an interesting thing to track if that necessitates lineup changes. And I don't mean as a starter. I don't mean starting five. I just mean with the rotation Pribble goes to. It'll be interesting to see if Idaho changes up a little bit of who plays where, because the guys who aren't starting, there's all reasons they're not starting. Like, hey, I love Tyler Linhart. I think he's a great offensive player, but he's clearly not starting because he's a little bit of a defensive liability with his lateral quickness. Isaiah Brickner, he's had some great moments, but he's a little bit inconsistent with his decision making. You can understand why that guy's coming off the bench, but there's some guys on the bench who I think they're gonna need to have more prominent roles in what Idaho does offensively for the team to continue to show the development they have.
Thank you, Brian. That was extraordinarily well thought out, and you pretty much nailed that on about 10 minutes. So props. My contribution to that was going to be, wow, that Northern Colorado game was a lot of fun. So thank you for getting way more in depth into that than I would have.
Can I say one thing real quick? Idaho's playing Weber State and Idaho State. It's on the road. This is a huge trip for Idaho, I believe, because Idaho could be favored in both these games, even though they're road games. Weber State, Weber State's been a pretty up and down team on the season, but the Wildcats have Blaze Threet, one of the top scorers in Big Sky play. He's a guy from the wing who can blow it open. But same thing with Idaho State. They've got Dylan Darling, the number one scorer in Big Sky play, averaging 19.7 points per game. He's a transfer, went to Central Valley High School in Spokane, transferred from Washington State to Idaho State. So there's some matchups to pay attention to, but these are both eminently winnable games for Idaho. And since what I think we're tracking is, can Idaho finish above 500 this year? That'd be a huge deal. And I mean, in Big Sky play first. If they can finish on the season over 500, fantastic. What I care about is in Big Sky play.
That would be nice.
Picking up consecutive wins would be a huge deal for this team. However, for what I believe is a solid team, like winning 2 road games it's a pretty tough call. Winning back-to-back road games for a trip that I honestly, I think there's some ways where this might be one of the tougher like road trips, just as far as like locations you're going to. That's a big task. Some things have to go right for Idaho, but tune in Thursday and Saturday. I'll be doing that. Again, these are winnable games, and that's the level this program's at. Lots of Big Sky games, virtually all Big Sky games. If you can beat Northern Colorado, yeah, they got lucky because the top score was out. But if you can beat Northern Colorado at home, that's telling you this team on any given night, they can beat anyone in conference.
Which is not something we've been able to say for a very long time, Brian. The Vandal basketball team is, for the most part, competitive every single night. And it's been a long time since we've seen that. So you mentioned the 2 road games this week, 4 games left at home, 6 games left on the road. So Thursday, Saturday this week, 6 p.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Pacific, as Thursday and Saturday go. And then they come back for Thursday, Saturday games, Portland State and Sacramento State before another road trip, and then ending the month of February back home against Idaho State. And then we finish off the season with March and then the trip down to Boise. So 10 games left to go, Brian. Vandals sitting at 9-12, 4-4 in conference. Hopefully we do see that 500 mark burst and get back in the rearview mirror. Idaho hopefully going above 500 in conference play, but we will see. Any final thoughts, Brian, on volleyball, women's basketball, men's basketball, as we are over the hour mark today?
No, other than to say, like, it sucks. Like maybe we brought it up sometimes when we're full disclosure producing in public. sometimes when we're like paying attention to multiple stuff on our screen that like listeners and viewers can't see, it's easy to miss a word or two that Dallas said. But I hate that we have to put the good, like awesome stuff with football on the shelf. Like, hey, the team's been doing the coaching staff's been doing a good job being like aggressive on social media so that people know what they're doing. Thomas Ford, if you're listening, I would love to see some videos once in a while. But like, it is not possible to follow the Vandal coaches and not know exactly what they're doing right now for recruitment, and that's been great. So like, hey, they're football's still doing a ton of good, correct, right things that people should get excited about. Sucks when Terry decides it's important for something really fucking stupid to happen so that we have to shelf something like that to talk about this. Like, hey, like Jason Mayer said, we learned Alex Moore had to medically retire. Sucks that Alex Moore had to medically retire, had a ton of knee injuries. But hey, you know what? It was kick-ass to watch him while we did. Glad to have had Alex Moore for the years we had him. Obviously, hey, you're Vandal forever. Wish you best of luck, Alex Moore.
Yeah, big props to Alex Moore. It's a bummer that career did not go as well as it should have. From all accounts, we heard that Alex Moore was a good dude. And man, before that injury happened, we were hearing, I mean, he's going to be a big favorite of McCoy. He's going to be a big part of this offense. And then unfortunately just got hurt against Wazoo and then has just never been able to fully come back from it. So, what could have been, but had some great moments in the Vandal Black and Gold. And then Brian, next week, we get to go back to fun things. We're going to talk more about Court Dennison and the defense next week. And I'm thrilled about that. The guy was a co-defensive coordinator of a Power 4 school. And he was 24, 25, like insane what he did. And yes, there were the off the field things and both parties got into some trouble there, and now he's working his way back up the ladder, has gotten here because he absolutely deserves it based on his playing career was very good. And then his career as a coach has been successful at every stop. So it really sucks that we have to delay that stuff a week because we've got to talk about the dumb decisions that Terry Golick has made as well. So we will move on from this, guys. We will continue to cover volleyball as it happens. Hopefully Krišková turns that program around and we are completely wrong on what we think is going to be the direction of the program for the next few years. But until then, guys, go Vandals, V's up, whatever you want to say. Football is back starting next week where we talk about some more fun things. Because again, this Vandal football staff is fun, Brian. They're doing a great job keeping people interested, keeping the momentum going from the Eck era, at least right now with what they can do. So we'll be back talking about them next week.
Yes, signing day event in Coeur d'Alene on February 6th. I'll be there. That's a Thursday for those curious.
Go Vandals, Brian.
Go Vandals.
Whoa, coming in really loud there. That was uncalled for and aggressive. Why did you do that? That was mean, Brian. You never should have done that.